June 19, 1975, Oak Park, Illinois. 10:30 at night. Sam Giancana is in his basement kitchen making a late-night snack, Italian sausage and peppers. The smell of garlic and olive oil fills the small room. There's something intimate about it, almost pathetic, because this is not a king in a palace. This is an old man in a bathrobe cooking in the basement like he's trying to convince himself he's normal. He's wearing slippers. He's 67. He tells people he's retired. He tells people he's done. But nobody who ever held power like Giancana simply retires. Not in Chicago, not in the outfit, not when you've spent decades collecting secrets like other men collect money. Across the street, the FBI agents parked in an unmarked car know better. They've been watching Sam's house for weeks, round-the-clock surveillance, shift changes, coffee cups, late-night boredom punctuated by tiny moments of movement, a curtain, a light, a silhouette. They know when he wakes up, when he eats, when he watches TV. They know who delivers things to the door. They know who lingers a little too long on the sidewalk. They know everything, except they don't know that right now someone is in the house. Someone walked past their surveillance, got through locked doors, got down to the basement, got into the kitchen, while Sam Giancana, once one of the most powerful mobsters in Chicago, stood at the stove stirring sausage. And here's the detail that makes every investigator's stomach drop. There's no struggle, no shouting, no chair knocked over. That tells you the killer didn't come in scared. He came in certain. The first shot hits him in the back of the head. Sam drops the wooden spoon, hits the floor face first. The pan keeps sizzling. The peppers keep popping in the oil like they didn't get the memo. Then 6 more shots, tight grouping, professional, and then one more, under the chin, angled up into the brain. A finishing shot. A punctuation mark. 7 bullets. Execution style. An hour later, the FBI finally enters the house and finds him face down in blood and sausage grease. The stove is still on. The smell of garlic is still in the air. And every agent in that basement is thinking the same thought. How does a man get killed inside a house we were watching? 3,000 miles away in Palm Springs, Frank Sinatra is on stage at a private party, performing for high rollers. Not a public concert, something more intimate, more controlled. The kind of room where everyone feels protected by money. He's in the middle of The Lady is a Tramp when his manager steps into the wings, waves him over. Frank sees his face and stops singing mid-verse. The band keeps playing, confused, trying to cover the gap. Frank walks off stage like he's just been pulled by a wire. 2 hours later, Frank still hasn't come out of his dressing room. When he finally emerges, his eyes are red, his hands are shaking. He tells his manager 3 words. I'm not talking. Not talking about what? About Sam, about their friendship, about the Cal Neva, about the election people still argue about what Sam knew, about why Sam was about to testify before Congress, about why someone wanted Sam Giancana dead before he could open his mouth. And most of all, about whether Frank Sinatra knew it was coming. Because when a man like Giancana dies at exactly the wrong moment, the world starts hunting for the people who might have known what he was about to say. To understand why Frank Sinatra locked himself in a room for 2 hours when Sam Giancana died, you have to go back to 1954, to a Chicago nightclub called the Villa Venice, to the night Frank Sinatra met the most dangerous man in America. Chicago in the 1950s belonged to the outfit. That's what they called the Chicago mob, not the mafia, not La Cosa Nostra, the outfit. And for long stretches of that era, the outfit belonged to Sam Giancana. Sam wasn't like the other mob bosses. He was small, 5'7", skinny, didn't look tough, didn't act tough, dressed in expensive suits, spoke softly, smiled a lot. But Giancana's reputation wasn't built on looks. It was built on what happened after you stopped laughing, on what happened when you forgot the rules. He had rackets everywhere: gambling, loans, prostitution, unions, protection. He had judges, cops, politicians. In Chicago, power didn't need to announce itself. It only needed to be obeyed. When Sam Giancana wanted something, Sam Giancana got it. Frank Sinatra in 1954 was at the peak of his comeback. The Oscar for From Here to Eternity, the Capitol Records era, the Nelson Riddle arrangements. Frank Sinatra was back, and he knew it. But Frank also knew where he came from. Hoboken, Italian, immigrant parents. He never forgot that certain people in America looked down on him, never forgot the subtle insults. The way people said his name with a little extra emphasis. So when Frank performed in Chicago, he made sure to pay respects to the men who controlled the city. Because Frank understood something most people didn't. In that world, respect isn't a compliment. It's a survival tool. That's how Frank and Sam met, through mutual friends, mutual interests, mutual respect. They hit it off immediately. Sam loved Frank's music. Frank loved Sam's stories. They were both Italian-American, both self-made, both men who understood the code, loyalty, family, and never, ever talking to cops. By 1960, Frank and Sam weren't just acquaintances. They were friends, real friends. Sam would fly to see Frank perform. Frank would call Sam when he was in Chicago. They'd have dinner, talk business, talk women, talk about the world the way men do when they believe their circle is unbreakable. And then in 1960, Frank asked Sam for a favor, a big favor. Frank Sinatra was all in for John F. Kennedy. He raised money, hosted events, made politics feel glamorous. He believed JFK could change America, or at least believed that being close to JFK would secure Sinatra's place in the center of history. But in the fall of 1960, the election was close, too close. JFK needed Illinois, and Illinois meant Chicago, and Chicago meant the outfit. Frank called Sam. The conversation was brief. Frank didn't ask directly. He didn't have to. He said JFK was good for everyone, good for business, good for the country. And it would mean a lot to Frank personally if Sam could help. Sam said he'd take care of it. What happened on November 8, 1960 in Chicago is still debated. But the facts are clear. JFK won Illinois by a razor-thin margin. And Chicago politics had a long, ugly reputation for machine control and vote manipulation. Organized crime ties are part of that larger story, even when specific claims remain contested. Whether Giancana delivered Chicago is exactly the kind of claim that lives in whispers, books, and allegations, hard to prove cleanly, impossible to ignore completely. But this is what is clear. Frank Sinatra was positioned as a bridge between two worlds that should never have touched so openly: Hollywood glamour and Chicago power. And bridges are always useful until they're dangerous. In January 1961, Frank Sinatra organized the inaugural gala for President Kennedy. He looked untouchable, the king of Hollywood, friend to the President of the United States. Sam Giancana watched on TV, saw Frank on stage, saw JFK smiling. Sam thought he had a friend in the White House. He was wrong, because JFK's brother, Bobby Kennedy, was now Attorney General. And Bobby had one mission: destroy the mafia. He didn't care who helped whom. He didn't care about old favors. He didn't care about Sinatra's friendships. The Kennedy administration's posture turned sharply anti-organized crime, and Bobby Kennedy became the face of that effort. Within months, pressure mounted on Giancana: surveillance, wiretaps, harassment, indictments, the heat that doesn't just chase you, it suffocates you. Sam couldn't understand it. In his mind, he had helped. He had played the game, and now the government was trying to crush him anyway. So he called Frank. "Talk to them," Sam said. "Tell them to back off." Frank tried. He went to the White House, talked to JFK, explained the situation, asked for breathing room. JFK listened, smiled, said he'd look into it. Nothing changed. And then in March 1962, something happened that made everything worse. JFK was supposed to visit Frank's Palm Springs compound. Sinatra had renovated like a man preparing for royalty. Cottages, security accommodations, even a helipad for the president's arrival. Then Peter Lawford called. JFK wasn't coming. He was staying at Bing Crosby's place instead. The explanation that followed, echoed in multiple accounts, was simple. Sinatra's mob associations had become a political liability, and Bobby Kennedy didn't want the president photographed anywhere near it. Frank went berserk, took a sledgehammer to the helipad himself, fired Lawford from his inner circle, swore he'd never speak to the Kennedys again. But the real damage wasn't the broken concrete. It was the message. The bridge was burned. And if Frank Sinatra couldn't protect Sam Giancana from Washington, then Sam Giancana was on his own. Frank Sinatra owned a piece of the Cal Neva Lodge, Lake Tahoe, clean air, postcard scenery, and a casino floor that literally straddled the Nevada-California line. Frank loved the place, performed there, brought friends. It was his domain. In July 1963, Sam Giancana showed up. This was a problem, a huge one, because Nevada gaming regulators had a rule. If you were on the state's excluded persons list, what people later called the Black Book, you weren't supposed to be in a Nevada casino. Period. Giancana was exactly the kind of name that triggered alarms. But Sam was Frank's friend, and Frank didn't believe the state could tell him who could sit at his tables. So Sam stayed. For days. Ate, gambled, relaxed, visible enough that regulators documented it. When the Nevada Gaming Control Board moved against Sinatra, it wasn't just about one weekend. It was about a principal, a celebrity casino owner who refused to cut ties with the wrong kind of friend. The board filed a complaint seeking revocation, and Sinatra, furious, chose to surrender his license rather than fight the complaint on their terms. The case became a turning point in modern Nevada gaming regulation. Sinatra was humiliated, financially hurt, socially insulted, but Giancana took it hard too, because it showed something brutal. Frank had lost real standing trying to protect that friendship. And the Kennedys, the men Frank had helped, had played a role in making Sinatra's associations radioactive. 2 months later, JFK was shot in Dallas. America turned into a fever dream overnight. Rumors exploded, political enemies, lone gunmen, foreign plots, mafia plots. Investigators looked everywhere. They looked at organized crime angles. Names like Giancana circulated in the public imagination for decades, even when hard proof remained elusive. Sinatra walked off a set, disappeared for days. Giancana, depending on the telling, was calm, maybe too calm, and the country moved forward. But the shadows didn't. By 1965, heat pushed Giancana out of the U.S. He fled to Mexico and lived there for years. Then in 1974, he was back, deported, returned, older, but still dangerous because of what he knew. He tried to retire, but retirement doesn't erase FBI interest, especially not when your name is connected to one of the most explosive Cold War revelations of all, the CIA's efforts to assassinate Fidel Castro. This isn't myth. It appears in declassified government records and related documentation. The CIA explored using underworld contacts, and figures like John Rosselli and Sam Giancana are part of that paper trail. So when Giancana returned, he returned as a liability. Then, in April 1975, the Senate's Church Committee began investigating intelligence abuses, illegal surveillance, covert operations, assassination plots. And they wanted to talk to Sam Giancana, because Sam knew things. Maybe not everything, maybe not cleanly, maybe not in a way that would hold up in a courtroom, but enough to make powerful people nervous. He knew about the CIA's interest in organized crime contacts for anti-Castro operations. He knew names, meetings, intermediaries. He knew the kind of details that don't belong in headlines. And he knew about the other dangerous intersection: politics, sex, access. Judith Campbell Exner's name is often mentioned in this ecosystem of allegations, linked in various accounts to both JFK and Giancana. It remains one of those historically radioactive topics where some details are documented, others contested, and the overall picture is messy but undeniably part of the era's mythology. The Church Committee subpoenaed Giancana, ordered him to testify, and Sam, old, proud, furious, started preparing. He hired a lawyer. He decided what he'd say and what he wouldn't. He looked at the world with the eyes of a man who understands one rule: if you're going to talk, you need to survive long enough to do it. And then, 8 days before his scheduled testimony, Sam Giancana made sausage and peppers in his basement kitchen. 7 bullets, execution style, while the FBI watched his house. Law enforcement searched for answers and found a nightmare, a locked narrative, no weapon, no clear entry, no reliable witness. To this day, Giancana's murder is widely treated as one of the most debated unsolved hits in organized crime history. And in recent reporting, new claims have surfaced, citing FBI interviews, about who may have ordered it, including allegations involving top outfit leadership. But the core mystery remains. How did the killer get past surveillance? That question doesn't just haunt true crime fans. It haunts the FBI's credibility. Because if a man under federal watch can be executed like that, then surveillance is theater, and someone out there knew it. When Frank Sinatra heard the news, he walked off stage in the middle of a performance, locked himself in his dressing room. His manager stood outside the door and said he heard Frank crying. After 2 hours, Frank came out, eyes red, voice hoarse. "I'm not talking," he said. His manager asked what he meant. "About Sam, about any of it. I'm not talking." And he never did. Not to the press, not to the FBI, not to anyone. Frank performed for another 20 years, albums, concerts, awards, the chairman, aging in public, but he almost never spoke Giancana's name again in any meaningful way. So who killed Sam Giancana? The theories are endless, and every theory has a reason it survives. The outfit. If Giancana was going to say too much, truth, half-truth, or just the wrong names, it was a risk no organization tolerates. The intelligence angle. If Giancana truly held operational details tied to covert actions, that's the kind of knowledge governments like buried. A personal betrayal. Because sometimes men die not for history, but for insult. Or maybe it was someone else entirely. Someone who knew the routine, the surveillance gaps, the exact moment the house would feel quiet. The case remains cold in the public mind, even as new reporting periodically reignites the "who ordered it" debate. Did Frank know? Did someone warn him? Did someone tell him to stay quiet? Or was Frank's silence simply grief? The grief of losing a real friend. Because for all the glamour, Sinatra was a man who worshipped loyalty. Loyalty was his religion. He loved people who stood by him. He destroyed people who embarrassed him. And Giancana, in Sinatra's mind, may have been one of the last men who knew him before the world turned him into a legend. In 1982, a reporter cornered Frank after a show, asked him about Sam, about the friendship, about the theories. Frank looked at him for a long time. Then he said, "Sam was my friend. That's all. That's all I'm saying." And he walked away. Frank Sinatra died in 1998, 23 years after Giancana. In all that time, he never broke his silence, never told what he knew or didn't know about politics, never explained why he risked so much standing to keep a friendship with a man Nevada regulators considered poison, never clarified what Giancana may have told him in private. Some secrets die with you, some friendships are worth more than truth, and some questions are never meant to be answered, because the moment you answer them, you put a target on your own back. Here's what we can say without turning history into fantasy. Sam Giancana was murdered execution style in his Oak Park home in June 1975, shortly before he was expected to appear in a high-stakes congressional investigation environment. Frank Sinatra had well-documented controversies involving associations with underworld figures and faced real consequences in Nevada gaming regulation connected to those associations. Government records and declassified documentation confirm that U.S. officials explored using underworld intermediaries in anti-Castro operations, with names like Rosselli and Giancana appearing in that paper trail. And Frank's relationship with the Kennedy world famously fractured in Palm Springs amid concerns about mob associations, an episode repeatedly described in major accounts. That's the spine. Everything else, the whispered details, the who knew what, the who ordered it, the idea that Sinatra's silence meant guilt, lives in the space between evidence and power. But here's what's undeniable. When Sam Giancana died face down in sausage grease and blood, Frank Sinatra locked himself away and made a choice. Silence. Not because it proves guilt, not because it proves innocence, because silence was the only move that kept him alive in a world where a man could be executed under FBI surveillance and the killer could still vanish. The truth is, we may never know who killed Sam Giancana, but we do know this. Frank Sinatra understood that night exactly what kind of world he'd spent his life balancing on. And he refused to give anyone a sentence they could use to pull him down. He took whatever he knew, fear, grief, loyalty, or something darker, and he carried it to his grave.